So hold on one sec, V, before you get going. So I'm Richard Clay, I'm Professor of Digital Cultures and I'm a member of the NURSA Steering Committee. What an amazing group it is to be part of, trying to steer. Can you imagine? Anyway, so I've just been asked by one of the co-chairs of the committee to remind you to turn off your phone.
It's already on.
So you go straight to the top of the class. Fantastic. So over to my colleague V. Pollock.
Hello everyone, it's lovely to see you all. Thanks for making the effort on a rainy day. My name's V. Pollock and I stepped into the very big shoes left by my colleague Professor Eric Cross, and I'm the Dean of Culture and Creative Arts at the university. And so my role is looking after the sort of Culture and Creative Arts portfolio all the university does across its 3 faculties. So and what we're going to talk about today is a partnership and a project that maybe sits within sort of culture and heritage but does have that reach across the 3 faculties, so hopefully there's something for all of you in it. So when I began working in this role, it became quite quickly apparent that the National Trust was a major partner in a lot of what we do, whether it be the stewardship of the landscape, access to heritage. And my first encounter with the National Trust was actually through something that went very wrong, and we ended up on the front page of a national newspaper with a project that we did. But through that, we got to meet lots of colleagues in the Trust, and we started talking about the work that we already did together and the work that we could do together. So today I'm going to start by talking to you a little bit about the partnership and what we've been doing, particularly over the last 3 years. And then we're very fortunate to have my colleague Helen Moore, who's going to come and talk about quite a new strand of what the National Trust is doing, which is working in urban environments, trying to help with equity of access to green space for everyone. And then we're going to go down even further to much more local, and we're fortunate to have a colleague, Claire Richardson from Gateshead Council, who's going to talk about a project we're currently doing together called the Tyne Derwent Way, which is extremely of at the moment because it's officially going to launch on the 11th of April. So you're going to get a sort of sneak preview into what we've been up to. So I'm sure that many of you, if you were working within the faculties, you probably had colleagues, or you might yourself might have worked with the National Trust in some capacity. The university's had a very long-standing relationship with the Trust. And what we began to do was to start collating the range of work that we did. And this is on the university website, and you can have a little look at it. We realised this was in about, I think it was 2020, 2021. I've got the kind of pandemic haze of trying to remember which year's which. But we did a call across the faculty and asked colleagues if they could tell us about the work they were doing. And at the time, we collated over £6.5 million worth of projects that had been realised in the previous 3 to 5 years. So maybe since about 2017, but obviously the history goes much further back. And after this, we actually found that we'd missed a lot of projects which hadn't come to us in one way or another. So that's a very kind of conservative estimate of the level of work. And what we tried to do is think about how the work, what type of work it was. So there were, research projects and networking projects in lots of different areas. We tried to look at what the aim of that work was. So, we're thinking there about place-based community innovation, but also the work that our students do, because as you'll be aware, our students are some of our greatest assets and our greatest ambassadors, and a lot of them were doing student projects with the National Trust. And we mapped these onto what was then the kind of Trust's areas of work or interest as outlined in their previous strategy. So we have heritage, landscape, and then everyone welcome, which are kind of key areas that the Trust were interested in, and I'm sure Helen will talk to you a little bit more about them. And it's just to give you a sense of the type of projects that we came across. So I've been part of a consortium since about 2017, I think, working on contemporary art in heritage. So we have had probably about now amassing to about £1.7 million worth of funding for various projects that look at the processes by which we put contemporary art in heritage sites and the practices. So actually, what does it mean for the people running the heritage site? Why would they want to do it? What does it mean for the artist, for an artist's career to come along and work collaboratively with a heritage organisation? And what do the audiences think? So quite often the heritage site will think, well, if we put contemporary art, we'll attract a new audience. And we sort of set out to try and find out whether that was true or not. And largely it's not. And from that, well, sometimes the finding is disproving what you anticipate. But from that, we've done a series of projects which have involved working with volunteers who are obviously, the front line of engagement and interpretation. And actually, the volunteers felt quite hesitant about talking about contemporary art. It was out of their comfort zone, but quite keen to know about it. So we've worked with volunteers to try and kind of better understand how we can support them. We've done work about, during COVID, unsurprisingly, about digital commissioning. So how can we keep the opportunities open but in a digital realm, and that was working very closely with Cherryburn, which many of you will be familiar with. And so we've done a lot of projects in that. So that's just one small example of the type of work that we've done. But we've done work about equity of access to landscape. So obviously the National Trust is one of the key landowners nationally and very much within our region. And actually, what about rights of way to common land? Unlocking Landscape, which was a colleague in History, Classics and Archaeology, was about making access to landscapes more inclusive and accessible. And as Helen will tell you, one of the Trust's founding aims was to provide access to landscape, heritage and beauty for everyone. So it wasn't, we are going to be custodians of big buildings. It was set up to provide that access to, and increasingly colleagues in the Trust are thinking about actually how do we do that, and how do we do that in a way that's meaningful and sustainable. So we, at the time, there was a project manager within the Trust, assistant director of operations. Trusts, like the university, loves acronyms. So we have a game of acronym bingo between ourselves and the Trust, and so the ADO was at the time someone called Robin Brown. And Robin, I think, it's fair to say she was quite atypical for working within the Trust, and she was quite a dynamic thinker. Well, she is still a dynamic thinker, but she's she's retired now. And we met through this on the project that went wrong, and we started talking about our shared interests. And we were looking at, and the part of the scoping activity was to try and recognise the volume of work between the Trust. Because I would say, so-and-so is working with the Trust. And she said, but we're also doing this with the university. And we realised that neither organisation had clear oversight of what was happening. And as we did it, we just gradually began to see the scale and the impact of the work. There's obviously Hadrian's Wall. We're all very familiar with that. Multi-stakeholder with, the AONB, Area of Outstanding National Beauty, with English Heritage, with the Trust itself. And we had projects like WallCap, which was training community archaeologists to actually look after, care for and feel connected to the landscape and the wall, which was quite often, sometimes literally in their back garden. So, that kind of scale of work and the potential scale of impact was huge. And approaching the pandemic, I think as that began to, the impacts of the pandemic began to be felt, I think there was a shared sense that we didn't want this partnership and this relationship to be lost. And so we formed an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, between the National Trust and the university. And the National Trust, like the university, loves hierarchy and boxes. So the Trust tends to separate its partnerships into regional partnerships and national partnerships. So if you were to Google university partnerships with the National Trust, you would have things like Exeter coming up, who are a partner around climate change. the University of Oxford, who are partner very much around conservation in quite a traditional sense of conservation. And they've got about 3 or 4 kind of national partnerships, none in the north yet. And then they have a series of regional partnerships, and these tend to be smaller, place-based and project-specific. And we kind of operate at the moment slightly between those 2 levels. So although a lot of our work is place-based, we do a lot of work with Cherryburn, Gibbside, Hadrian's Wall, the birds on the Farne Islands, the coast, everything. A lot of that work is informing what the Trust is doing nationally. So although it's place-based, it does have national and sometimes international significance. The contemporary artwork I was outlining at the beginning, there's now an international network which is looking at contemporary art and heritage, because it's quite a developed practice in the UK, pioneered in many ways by the Trust, not very well developed globally. And so they're exploring how we can share best practice and learn from one another, and what are the challenges that we might be able to support sort of global colleagues in addressing. And the Trust have been kind of on that journey, from us doing small projects in the northeast to developing national projects to developing this international network. And so that's just one example of how, there's lots of work, particularly around landscape, environment, flood prevention, that's happening with the Trust in our place in the sense of the north, but is informing much broader practices. So almost at a regional level, the work we're doing is quite strategic, rather than just being a project here and a project there and a project here. But some of the work we're doing also is national and international. So we're sort of sitting in this funny hybrid position between the Trust's kind of 2 categories. But what we have done over the last 3 years, and through some of these projects, and this is just some of the student projects we have. So we have lots of what we call collaborative doctoral awards. I'm sure many of you are familiar with them, when PhD students work collaboratively between a partner organisation and the university. And they stretch across arts and heritage and natural sciences in particular. And our funding for, I think, natural sciences PhDs has just been kind of reconfirmed, that doctoral training partnership, and the Trust are a partner in that. So, there's a lot of really significant work happening. And I'll take you back to the nice picture of Sycamore Gap at the beginning. So what we've done over the past 3 years is really get to know, build a relationship. So I think rather than building a project, we see our work with the Trust very much as building a relationship, and that's been getting to know a lot of the team regionally and the senior leadership team regionally. And we're currently doing a piece of work with them which is sort of, okay, we've worked together for 3 years regionally, but what are the strategic priorities? So what are the challenges the Trust are facing regionally? What are the priorities they want to address regionally? And we can then look at how we can sort of map into that and support them in that. And are there any big projects that we want to do together? So we've moved from a kind of courting phase and getting to know you phase to sort of being engaged, I would say. And the Trust itself, it's been through quite a lot, I would say. When the pandemic came, it sort of went into almost necessarily to preserve sort of jobs and what they were doing, went into a sort of almost period of retrenchment, which was partly why we wrote the MOU, which was so within this we could still keep our relationship going. We both committed to it. But they've come out of the pandemic extremely well. I think it's quite well known there's sort of a deep love for the Trust, memberships going up, and very pleased to say that they're now looking at their strategy from 2025 to 2030, and so we've just extended our memorandum of understanding for a year, so we can talk to them about how we best support that national strategy. Moving forward from 25 to 30. So we're sort of at a point of kind of reflection, but also becoming more strategic in our partnership. And that gives you a little flavour of the partnership and a little sense of the range of projects that we're doing. And this is on the university website, so you can peruse it at your leisure. I can send a link round if there's a way of sending it round to everybody, so you can peruse it at your leisure. But we thought it might be useful and quite interesting for you today if Helen came along to talk to you about part of the Trust's work that you're perhaps less familiar with, and it is very, very new, and Helen's been key in kind of shaping it, and I think it's fair to say the North East has been quite key in shaping it. So I'll hand over to Helen, who's going to talk about some of the National Trust's urban work.
So hello, and thank you everyone for inviting me here to present to yourselves. As V's mentioned, the topic I'm obviously specifically talking about today is the urban work that the Trust does. Again, it's not an area that is as well known as the other areas of the Trust's work, but it's something that, especially the new strategy that's coming out next year, is growing. So I'm the Urban Programme Manager for the North East. It's a new role, been in post a year now. Started off with myself and one other. We've now grown to 8 of us working in a very much matrix way across the Trust and with other organisations like Gateshead Council, like the university, in the way that we work. So I just thought it'd be useful to take a step back to see, why are we doing this? Why is the Trust getting involved in this type of work? We're well known for our mansion houses, we're well known for working on properties, on coastline, on countryside. We all know about the nature, cultural heritage, health and well-being crises that are playing out in society at the minute. And alongside that, thinking about climate action and everyone welcome in terms of the inclusion agenda. And these are all, we need to look at these holistically, and they're all interrelated. But we obviously... We all know that the greatest impact in this, you could include in that the cost of living crisis actually, we all know that the greatest impact is going to be in the urban areas. And obviously a way of thinking about that is connecting people to sort of high quality green space. Can that be at the heart of some of the solutions for this challenge? So why urban? Why the Trust? Like Vi was saying, we're very new to this. We don't have all the answers. We do just want to be around the table and ask the questions with others. But it does take us back to our charitable purpose and how the Trust was set up. Our co-founder Octavia Hill was very much a social reformer and very much about improving urban housing and protecting green spaces in urban areas. So actually the way that we were set up initially is all about the ways that we're looking at and we're talking about now in terms of urban. Increasing the urban populations, we know the urban populations are only growing. But likewise, the Trust's places, there's only 2% of our places in urban settings. And that isn't going to change. We are where we are, and we're not saying we're going to change where the mansion houses are. They'll stay, and that visitor business will continue. But we're very much looking at how we can use our skills, our knowledge, and working in partnership with others off property. And that came about in 2020 with the urban places becoming one of the 6 pillars of our strategy. So that's the 2020-2025 strategy, which is now being rolled into our strategy, which will be coming out next year. But the aim being to address unequal access to nature, beauty and history, focused in and around towns and cities. I love this slide because I think it describes how the Trust can come to a table, can come to a project. So we're not saying the Trust's coming here and leading, we're not saying the Trust's coming here and, we're definitely not taking over. Quite often we could come and we could listen, we could come and we could bring our expertise, and we can come as a collaborator, but very much it depends on the project and it depends on what the gap is and what the need is for that project. So it's very much looking at how the Trust's ways of working are changing as well. And with that, we did write an urban plan again, as Vi was talking about. It was in lockdown, and it was very much. There's only so much you can do, and so much collaboration you can get in that period. So that was a document that was created just to start our thinking about the urban work, but it very much is a document we know we need to now co-create with others. So with the new national strategy, we're also looking at how do we create a North East urban plan. So the urban principles are very much, they're lined up very much to what the National Trust principles are anyway, but it's very much about seeking that external funding. We bring something to the pot and so do others. Talking about our inclusion agenda, we've got a really strong North inclusion agenda in the Trust. How do we make sure that's rolled out off property as well as on our properties? Commitments to organisational learning with yourselves and others. Partnership working, we definitely can't do this alone. And very much what I was saying before about off property, it's as much about on property as it is off property and not just working to our boundaries. But that R&D side, like how can we learn from what us and others are doing? New ways of working, you know, we might not get everything right, but you know, how do we challenge and test what we're doing? But going and being guided where the need is greatest. This is our team. So at the minute, there's 8 of us working in very much a matrix way. So as I was saying, not everybody's in the North East Urban team. Some of us are in the IPT, which again, the acronym is the Innovation and Partnership team in the Trust, which is very much the R&D side. There's 12 people nationally, and we borrow people from across the Trust to help us in this work. Likewise, I haven't got photos for everyone yet. We've got 3 members of the team working in the Tyne Derwent Way, which Claire will talk a bit more about, which is one of our projects we're working on in the North East. And again, very much we're set up as a programme, so we very much have a sponsor and a client role in the Trust. And our sponsor being Sarah Pemberton, who is the new Assistant Director of Operations, who took over from Robin Brown when she retired, and Eric Wilton, who's the General Manager for a portfolio which includes Gibbside and Crookhall Gardens, very large portfolio. Useful, I think, just to see some of the cross-cutting benefits and outcomes of this work. Again, we think this work with partners is looking at, it looks at everything from placemaking to culture, climate change, health and well-being. It cuts across so many different agendas. If we get this right and if we work in partnership, these are some of the benefits and outcomes of this work. So what are we doing in terms of how are we working in this way in the Trust? So the first thing we thought about in terms of how we could work with partnerships was the rollout of green corridors, and they're actually green-blue corridors. So from 2022, there was an ambition in the Trust to work with partners off property to create 20 large green corridors across the countries. And we've got 15 currently, and 3 of them are in the North East. So these are the 3 we're talking about. With Claire from Gateshead Council, we'll be talking a bit more about the Tyne Derwent Way. But equally, we've got a green corridor now in Durham City, linked to Crookhall Gardens, and Middlesbrough, South Tees and Ormsby Hall. And this, I can share the slide deck with you, but this just shows you, just tries to explain a bit about what a green corridor is. It's that connection to towns and cities. It's easy access to nature-rich spaces. Through investment and management, we can deliver significant benefits. And just a dip into a little bit about Durham City Green Corridor here. So this is the vision, this is the first visual of what that could look like. So you can see in the green, that's Crookhall Gardens. And we acquired Crookhall Gardens a couple of years ago now, and it wasn't so much about Crookhall Gardens and what that building was, and it was more about the positioning of it. And it's 10 minutes into the centre of Durham, and then it takes you out onto this corridor that was, it's greenbelt, but it wasn't really known about. Some people accessed it because they knew about it. More people accessed it in lockdown, actually, because they suddenly discovered it. But what we're working towards with partners and landowners is how that can be accessed more. How can those communities access this land better? At the minute, the footpaths aren't great, so how can we actually make that a better nature space and space for people? And it's that link between urban and rural that's so interesting, and it's, we all need space. And with that, the highlights for me from last year for the Durham Green Corridor were very much, we've got a project manager in post who's done a fantastic job of getting the governance set up, starting to talk about the partnerships. But equally, we're a big organisation like Newcastle University. We need to talk internally as much as externally, so we need to get the message right internally. It's a big change for us, this type of working. And it's not for everybody, and it's not understood by everybody, but we need to start the talking internally about how this is good for us in terms of, in the partnership working and off property. We did a vision workshop, which was very different again for the Trust, in that we did it with our partner, Durham County Council. And that was really successful in bringing different parties to the table and different ideas. When it isn't just the Trust thinking and talking, it's those different ideas that come out to play. And we had some funding success, and you'll see coming out from now onwards until till October, there's a blossom events and lots of different blossom events, 25 different events happening across Durham this year. And there's some access works as well happening across the Green Corridor, which we had some pots of success with funding. The Tyne Derwent Way, I'll leave that for Claire to go into more detail, but again, that's the partnership with the two different universities actually, Tyne and Weir Building Preservation Trust and Gateshead Council and ourselves through the Levelling Up funding. This just shows you the blue-green corridor and the route taking you from St Mary's Heritage Site all the way down to Gibbside. It's an existing route, but how can we help with sort of the animation, the use, the nature along the route, people's access to places. So the exciting bits last year that we appointed 3 new roles, 2 of them of which were hosted by the Trust. So very much, Claire will tell you that we work to our strengths in terms of who hosts and who leads these roles. But we're very much working across the partnership. We've seconded somebody from Gibbside in terms of, we noticed there was heritage wasn't as strong in the partnership maybe, and we thought, what can we bring to the table? And obviously the Trust is well known for its nature as well as heritage and culture. So we've seconded a ranger for the year. But yeah, the Shared Prosperity Fund, which Claire will go into, was great news for the partnership, and then obviously what we can do along the route with that funding. And this is just a flavour of some of the projects, I'll leave again for Claire to go into in more detail, that we're working in partnership. National Trust isn't working on all of these, it's very much where the strength is, we'll be working on it. But yeah, it just gives you a flavour of the next couple of years of work on the route. We've recently, the third Green Corridor that we're working on in the region is the South Tees Green Corridor, and that's very much almost be in the middle, taking you out to Middlesbrough and the River Tees and then out the other way to Roseby Topping. So it's very much the urban Middlesbrough, but then out to the rural Tees and rural Roseby Topping. I love the name of that. That was the team's name. And again, it's that green-blue corridor. I'll leave these for you to peruse and have a look through, but it's that connection to nature, people to nature, in areas of deprivation where people don't often have access to quality green space. And it's on their doorstep, it's just a bit no-go quite often at the minute. So again, what we've done there is we've appointed a project manager, which it helps to have obviously that person who's working on something full-time. We've done vision work, shopping, stakeholder mapping. It's all been very early doors internal at the minute, just to get our thoughts in order before we take it out wider. But we've done some drone footage, getting our governance in place, and then getting that central internal support for the project to make sure that it's got legs when we do sort of go outside to partnerships on it. And equally, as well as the Green Corridor work, which has taken up a lot of the team's time, as you'd imagine, they're big projects in themselves, we're also very aware of Newcastle opportunities. We've had long-standing relationship with the Urban Green Newcastle, the Parks and Allotments charity in Newcastle, and we are supportive and we're looking at ways we can continue to work with them. We've spoken to the Rees Foundation and the partners about the Eusburn Way. It's another green-blue corridor that's being funded by the Rees Foundation. And yeah, we're looking at ways that we can work together to learn from each other. We're all doing this at the same time, so how can we learn together? There's the Newcastle High Line, which is the biggest brownfield site to the west of Newcastle. There's a memorandum of understanding between Newcastle Council, Network Rail and Homes England. And the trusts come in terms of thinking through, could there be active travel routes? How do we look at sustainability? How do we look at green access to that space to make sure it isn't just hard urban? So yeah, there's conversations and we're around the table on that. And then equally, we go back to the MOU with the university and how we work on our places, and equally how we're working off our places now with the university. We've got to consider in all of this work, especially I'm thinking from the northeast point of view, everything that's coming up or is happening around us as well in the northeast. So Urban Nature North is a report that was commissioned by a cohort of charities and organisations, and the report landed in October 2023. And with that, what does it actually mean? What are the findings of that report? How do we now actually take forward and disseminate? So that work's starting to happen now. What's coming out of that report and how does it change what we're thinking, what we're doing? Equally, we've got small scale interventions in terms of nature neighbourhoods. That's come out of the People's Plan for Nature, and that's an RSPB, Woodlands Trust and National Trust plan. And with that is now being run through the nature neighbourhoods. We've got Walker in Newcastle, so that's a national nature neighbourhoods piece of work, I guess, which is, and the focus in the northeast is on Walker and Newcastle, and that's working through Urban Green Newcastle. We've obviously got devolution. We know NEMCA's coming, and we've got the new mayor coming. What does that mean for everything that we do? And we've got the Northeast Destination Partnership pilot, which is looking at regional tourism. The Northeast was the pilot for that. That's finishing this month. What does that mean? And then equally, we've got Northeast Community Forest. That's, you know, since 2021 we've had that. The National Trust's been successful in seeking funding on the Durham coastline, planting trees. But equally, how can we think through all our work and how we're working with the Northeast Community Forest? Always mindful of the National Trust national programmes, whether that's Everyone Welcome, which is our inclusion agenda, Climate Action, or the Blossom campaign. Like I said, in Durham, there's a lot going on. How can we learn from that? And equally, there's loads going on in Birmingham and London. So at the end of, have a mop-up session at the end of the year, how can we then take the learnings forward and actually, should we be expanding that in the North East? Could we work across wider partnerships like Gateshead? How do we do that? And then obviously we've got the new NT strategy coming out next year. And this is just a snippet really of some of the partners that we're working in relation to stakeholders and partnerships across the North so far. There's a lot more than that, but yeah, it just shows you the wealth of organisations out there and who we are and who we could be talking to. I'm sure there's a lot more. Thank you. Do you want me to wait for questions at the end? Yeah.
At the end. So,
yeah, I'll hand over to Claire.
hello.
As is here.
So Claire's going to talk in a bit more detail about the Tyne Derwent Way, which is basically, if you imagine from Swingbridge all the way to Gippside, taking in the staves and along that way. So
This, I might have pressed the wrong button. This slideshow might just have a life of its own, and I'll try and keep up with it. So really, this is taking everything V and Helen has said previously and drilling it down into a case study that we're working together on in Gateshead. But why did we start doing it is the first question. My background's built heritage. I was the conservation officer at Gateshead Council prior to this role. Dunstan Staithes is a scheduled monument, grade 2 listed, so it's been a long-term problem of my list of problems, which, as you can imagine, was quite complex. Working with the Tyne and Weir Building Preservation Trust, trying to figure out what can we do to secure its future. It's a bit of a catch-all. The longer it remains inaccessible to people, the more the birds like it. The more the birds like it, the less chance we have of getting people back on it, because the birds are protected at different times of the year. Then there's the cost of maintaining it and managing it, the cost of repairing it if you want to go down that route, and the fact that it's really satisfying to certain people to try and set fire to it because it's so difficult to set fire to. So once it's alight, it's a right nightmare to put out. So there's a lot of satisfaction for some people in there. So we started looking at what we could do practically to support Tyne and Weir Building Preservation Trust. At the same time, with the university, colleagues of mine were looking at what could be done with Riverside Park. Riverside Park grew out of the Garden Festival. It contains a sculpture trail. We don't maintain it, we don't manage it. With austerity and all the cuts that have happened, everything's pretty much reactionary, as is with most authorities. And we get lots of reports of antisocial behaviour. So what did we do? Well, first of all, we looked at Riverside Park. We commissioned Colour, a landscape architect and urban design firm, with the university to look at how Riverside Park might be re-envisaged. How could it be reimagined? How could it form an active, valuable part of our riverside front? And how could it start connecting Staithes South Bank to the town centre and everything that was happening? Plus, going across the river into Newcastle and breaking down that blue barrier that is the River Tyne. And we came up with City in a Wood. So we'll just leave that one there for the minute. The second problem, Dunstan Staithes. So we held a design sprint pre-COVID with a very wide range of stakeholders looking at how you could reimagine the Staithes, what are the options, and this could be as visionary and off the top of your head as you wanted it to be. And we've covered a lot of options here, including driving range golf provided on the top with golf balls made of fish food. No, I'm not joking. I'm really not. That was one of the ideas, and it's still a preferred idea from some people. What came out of that meeting, that workshop, was Robin Brown from the National Trust offering the National Trust as a consultancy to could they come in and could they, with all their experience of running attractions, but also engaging with community groups and participation, could they help Tyne Building Preservation Trust look at what they're doing and how to do it differently? And the Council and Historic England took Robin at her word and pulled together some funding to create a piece of work. Not long after that, the National Trust announced its intention to create green corridors in partnership with other authorities. So we were like, excellent, we're already talking. As Helen said, 3 corridors in the northeast. We're slightly different to Durham. We don't have a new property. We don't have joint officers. What we are is funded by external funding or in-kind contributions from all the organisations. It's how we've been from the start. And that has led to the Tyne Derwent Way project, which is being delivered by what we are now calling ourselves the Gateshead Riverside Partnership, which is the 3 organisations plus the 2 universities. And we're going to run out of space in the future for all these logos we need to have on everything, especially with the levelling up. So to date, we have been working together in various guises for about 8 or 9 years, depending what the issue was and who the organisation was best placed to help or intervene or bring together new ideas. And it's only in the last sort of 3 years that we've formally convened this partnership. We're looking at the Green Corridor as an accessible area for nature, for heritage and for culture, for the benefit of local people, but with a very open eye on the emerging visitor economy for the region. We've had seed funding through the university, £25,000 plus £5,000 from the Catherine Cookson. There was the £10,000 between the Gateshead Council and Historic England for the Staithes project. Then we got £550,000 from the Community Renewal Fund to look at the feasibility of all manner of different things. And then that's led to approximately 1.7 million from the Shared Prosperity Fund, which we're in the process of spending. And as much as we're in the process of spending that now, we also need to have an eye on what happens when that money finishes. So, as I've said, we're working across the heart of the Tyne Derwent Way. We're working with local people. We're specifically looking at outdoor spaces rather than indoor, with the exception of St Mary's Heritage Centre. And we're looking at sustainability in everything that we do. So what can we do that leaves a legacy? How can it work in the future once this funding's finished? How will everything we do become part of a future legacy? If you're a planner, you'll like a red line. If you're not, I apologise. But the hatched area in the middle is the Metro Centre, which is a different project area. How does it fit with wider ambitions? Well, we've got what's called the River Tyne Renaissance, which is looking at £2 billion investment over the coming years. The biggest thing on here that will stand out is the International Conference Centre, which isn't on here. It sits down by where it says Baltic Quarter. It's not on here. Yeah, it's on my slide. Top corner. Riverside Park. Oh, the slide has shifted, hasn't it? Right, Riverside Park's not in Newcastle, it's in Gateshead. It's quite definitely in Gateshead. Anyways, the key point here is Clasper and Askew, 400 homes. They sit right on the edge of Riverside Park. So when they come online and are occupied in approximately 2026, that's 400 homes of new people who will walk through that park every day to where they want to go, whether it's for leisure, for commuting, for family time, or with friends. Helen mentioned this. Our project structure is quite different, simply because we are using which organisation can do what to its best. And Gateshead Council isn't necessarily the fastest when it comes to procurement of new staff or recruitment. Wrong word. So we created 3 new jobs under the National Trust and 2 under Tyne Way Building Preservation Trust. The National Trust playing to its strengths around people and nature. Tyne Way much better at taking on old buildings and turning them into something viable and sustainable. We've secured an additional £20,000 from Historic England to enable a 1-year heritage outreach officer. We're also looking at creative roles which are project specific and temporary in nature. We are running Riverside Arts Trail with a creative producer and working with 5 different schools for the next 2 years. And we're also looking at an artist in residency at Dunstan Staithes, but also at a site called the former Salt Store, which is opposite the filling station at Swalwell Roundabout. Partnerships, again, it's not a complete list, it's just an ongoing, as we meet people and we work with them, we add them to the list, and so it goes. This sums up where we are in terms of the visitor economy. So Newcastle Gateshead Initiative are doing a big piece of work at the minute about destination planning for the 7 local authorities, which will become part of NEMCA. It's looking at how to grow the existing visitor economy, but also how to create something that's sustainable and regenerative. And it really sums up what we're doing along the green corridors, which is taking what's there and cultivating it to create something that creates a legacy that's sustainable. Helen's mentioned the various projects. Her slide's much better than mine because it's got pictures on, and I'll be copying that for the next time I do this. But key things jumping out of here: green space audit, we're improving green spaces, and that isn't just necessarily improving the quality of the space, it could be improving infrastructure for people so that we can grow the number of visitors whilst protecting green spaces, and it's finding that balance between the nature and the people element. Repairing and restoring, renewing, relaunching, redefining the sculpture trail in Riverside Park, which may or may not sit just in Riverside Park in the future. It could grow. Vi's not reacting to me at all now. I've mentioned the Salt Store site. Cycling, anything to do with health and well-being. Gateshead has a higher than national average obesity problem in years 1 to 6 school children. We also have a national issue with mental health in young children, not to mention an ageing population in Gateshead. Forest schooling for all age groups with a focus on youths, and mental health and well-being for adults. Newcastle University Science Lab and Cultural Programme. This is something that's coming forward this year and looking specifically at engaging with Dunstan Staithes, bringing people to the Staithes, how to activate the Staithes. A joint project with Northumbria and Newcastle Universities called Flourish, which is looking at how to develop creative practitioners so that they're sustainable and that they can thrive without being moved from temporary accommodation to temporary accommodation. And as we've mentioned, what does this look like when the funding finishes? What's our legacy? But then how do we move on to the next phase? Who is the next phase? Which part of the partnership? Is the partnership changing? Is it bigger? Is it a new partnership? Is it a trust? And it goes on. But just a little bit about Riverside Park. This is happening this year. We've got the historic pictures. I'm not going to ask if anyone remembers it. Although I have spoken to someone today who does remember the Staithes in action and the ships from the 1960s. City in a Wood. What are we doing immediately? Signage into and out of the park at the end of the high level bridge. We've done woodland management along the red paths on this plan. This is the section closest to the high level bridge. By widening the paths and creating a gap before the growth of trees, You create more visibility and views for people using it, but you also improve their perception of safety and natural light. This is the section between the King Edward Rail Bridge and the Redheugh Bridge. Now this is the all singing, all dancing, highly ambitious, we would love to do this option. It's got pump tracks, play areas for all children of all ages and all ability. It's got performance space for events. It's got the best coffee in Gateshead. But we're not quite there yet. So this year we're going to do the coffee. We're going to do some play equipment that won't be burnt down because it'll be fireproof. And we're going to use it to test community needs and gardening in that area as part of just seeing what works while we address some of the wider social issues. We're also going to look at improving the paths and lighting throughout the whole park, again going back to that community need for safety and that perception of feeling confident walking through. We've brought the railway quarter into the project, which is the section around Wellington Street and Hill Street at the south end of the high level bridge, and it bridges the gap between Riverside Park, which is just here, and St Mary's, which is just at the far corner. And we're looking at how to activate that to support the businesses that are already there. We've got the French wine shop, we've got a couple of microbreweries, 2 larger pubs, but we've also got Serenity Spa and more, and the donut shop. So it's how to grow them, what do they need, but what do they want as well? How can we use the outdoor spaces? For example, where the Patterson's building was at the end of the Tyne Bridge. So we're looking at art, following from the sculpture trail into Railway Quarter, and how that can activate the area whilst waymarking it for future users. What have we done to date? We've appointed our staff. We're launching on the 11th of April. It's taken a long time to get to this point. None of us are quite grey yet, but we are launching a 12-month programme of activity and events to see what works, what doesn't work, test things, try things in different ways, tweak things, learn. And most importantly, take the community not just with us, but alongside us, so that they're as involved and bedded in this area as we are. That's what we've said we'll do. In a nutshell, it comes down to well-being, health, green spaces, and improving access to heritage, nature and culture. There you go.
So I'm just going to say a very, very few words about some of the work that the university's done on the Tyne Derwent Way. And Helen and Claire were kind enough this morning to join us and talk to about 60 staff and students from across all the 3 faculties and give the same presentations, but with different asides, because they're endlessly creative. And we talked about afterwards some of the opportunities to work with us and to join with us. But we have actually done quite a lot of work already. Newcastle University staff and students from the Business School, Architecture, Planning, the School of Natural and Environmental Sciences, Fine Arts, History, and a whole range of others have engaged in projects throughout the last 4 or 5 years, particularly, and ramping up. So there's an aspiration to mobilise the one community that we are all a part of in the university, which is all of our current staff, all of our students, all of our retired staff and all of our alumni, to work together to try and make the most of this incredible jewel of a green-blue corridor that's on our doorstep, but could do with a little bit of polishing, I think. So we might be coming back to NURSA and asking, do you want to help? So, but don't freak out. It'll be fun, honestly. So that's it really from me. I'd like to really thank the speakers and then ask you guys if you've got any questions for them. So do you have any questions for us? Eric? No,
I love grand visions. I'm old enough to remember the States in the 40s and the 50s, never mind the 60s, okay. So I've seen a lot of visions come and go over the course of my lifetime. To translate large visions into things that really work, you need considerable grassroots involvement, and you need the involvement of those people who in their own right are experts. And so, for example, amongst a huge number of organisations, I've seen hardly any where those grassroots expertise comes from. So, for instance, I was a Tyneside, I was one of the 8 founders of the Newcastle and Tyneside Bird Club, which goes back to the late 1950s. I think of the Durham Bird Club on the other side of the river. I think of the Natural History Society of Northumbria, one of the oldest in the country, which owns the Hancock Museum and most of its contents and so on. I think of the Northumbrian Wildlife Trust, situated in Gosforth, the Durham Wildlife Trust. I know hundreds and hundreds of people involved in all of those organisations, and the people who are for these organisations in the university, because I've been in the university for 40 years.
Professor Edmondson, what's your question?
The question is, why weren't any of these organisations on the chart? And what are you doing to recruit that bit, which is absolutely essential for your delivery?
I mean, I think it's fair to say a lot of those organisations like NHSN are already involved or have been in touch. We've been in touch with them about the project. We've only had our volunteer coordinator Stuart and our project manager Bevan post since August. So they've been building some of those connections. So rest assured that they are happening, and we have had quite a lot of community or grassroots involvement from I would say the VCSE, sort of voluntary charity and sort of third sector, coming along to workshops and things like that. So they may not have been represented, but we have been speaking to them. We're looking for perhaps, I think in some cases, there's a specific ask or a specific opportunity that they're looking for so they can sort of anchor their involvement. And so it's part of what we're doing now is finding what the needs are. And then the only way this will work, you're right, is if we actually, at that point when we know how best to utilise their expertise, and they can feed into things as they develop. So yes, very valid point, and we are on it.
And the grassroots bit completely, it can't just be us or even those big organisations.
Sorry, the grassroots can't be what?
It can't just be us, it needs to be those grassroots organisations, you're completely right. So in terms of the appointment of Lucy, who's our volunteer, our community person, and then we've got Stuart, who's our volunteer person, they've gone in and they've gone into a level at grassroots that we haven't been able to today, just because we are working on multiple projects, hence we knew it needed a team. So the Time Don't Wait team are doing really now what we wanted to do, but we haven't been able to do because it's just part of the day job. So yeah, you're entirely right, and we're at the start of that process, and we know we're not, the trust's not going anywhere. We know it's going to be a long burn. We know it's going to be a long time. The council's not going anywhere. Hopefully the university isn't going anywhere. We're big partners who are committed to this type of work, and we know it takes time. We know it takes partnership. We know it takes grassroots entirely, and I completely get that.
We think it's a 40-year project.
I agree completely.
Yeah.
40 years doesn't seem very long
I think
to me.
I'll be
But I
retiring
honestly
for this.
think you need to be naming these potential groups right from the beginning, because my experience is if people are invited halfway into some some massive script, and they've already seen things done that are counter to all the things that they know about, and I think there's stuff like that going on at the moment, they are much more reluctant to join than if they feel they've been a valued, identified partner right from the beginning, even if it's just notional.
I
So
think
you should be asking their permission to put their names up on a slide, which perhaps grows up from the bottom as yours converges down from the top, because it's at the centre. It will matter.
It's a fair point, though, but the thing is, it sounds like we've been at this for a long time, for 8 years, but a lot of it, there was no funding. So we were committing time as partners out of commitment to the project and to the mission. And I think really the first 8 years have mostly been a kind of discovery phase and identifying where the issues are and where the opportunities are, and growing this core set of partners who can leverage off each other, who are stakeholders, who are anchor institutions, and can then convene the kind of additional partners you're talking about. So lots of big decisions haven't really been made. But I think we're at the point now where we're testing and we're expanding, and we're into the phase where it is, as Bea said, really crucial, and we are doing that work now to reach out to the kinds of organisations you're talking to.
Well, that's great. And all part of your elbow, I mean, it excites us. I mean, we walk those ways every week, every other week. It's been our lives, and we know how many people at grassroots level there are involved, or who would like to become involved. But I think, I'm not sure much news about this is kind of percolating.
Not yet, no.
Not yet. It's coming.
Can I ask two questions? One is, what's the St Mary's Heritage Centre?
Yes.
And I've heard quite a lot about the Terry Farrell strategic plan for Newcastle. I've actually never heard of the Derwent Valley plan. That's my fault.
No, it's not.
No, it's not.
It's
New. It's
I've
new.
never heard of it.
It's new.
Okay. The Terry Farrell plan for Newcastle is quite old now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but what's happened to it? What
Oh,
are we doing? Although you've split out urban and rural, I think there's a place for activity and help within an urban situation as well as the rural.
I think the point about the Tyne Derwent Way is that connectivity. So exactly what you're saying about that link between urban and rural. So in a sense, Gateshead Riverside Park is an urban park that then kind of goes along the Tyne Derwent Way out towards a more rural hinterland, if you like. And so that connectivity is absolutely crucial to this initiative. So we're not separating it out, we're thinking about the connectivity between the two, exactly what you're saying. With the Terry Farrell plan, we've got the Farrell Centre, as you might know, which is recently opened. Which,
You've got what, sorry?
the Farrell Centre,
Yeah.
which is the Terry Farrell sponsored the creation of it's essentially a kind of museum or gallery for architecture, planning and landscape. And although I don't think the Farrell plan is being implemented, what it does provide is a point of departure for conversation around how, you know, our issues of urban planning essentially, and how to better engage communities in decision making. And so the Farrell Centre uses things like the Farrell's plan to start some of these conversations about contemporary urban planning. So it might not have been realised, but it has a life beyond its plan.
What about St Mary's Heritage Centre?
So St Mary's Heritage Centre is the original parish church for Gateshead Town. It sits next to the end of the Tyne Bridge. It's been run for the last 10 years as a heritage centre by the council. Before that it was the Phillips Auction House.
Ah, right. Okay.
And it's in the last 3-4 months it's been transferred to Tyne and Way Building Preservation Trust, who are looking at ways to make it sustainable
Oh.
and relaunch it both for commercial and community interests.
Thank you.
So, and the reason you don't know about this yet is because it hasn't launched. So there's going to be a launch, which Claire mentioned, the 11th of April, was that correct? And at that point there'll be a website as well.
We'll have
So
a
we-
website, a
Mhm.
monthly newsletter, press and social media presence. So the opportunities to then engage in a different way will be out there.
So a lot of this discovery phase of work, or phases of work, has never had an online presence. So it's never involved building a website, because we weren't at in a position yet to show and to report and to engage. So
You know,
we're
I
there
actually
now.
think we're very, very lucky in the North East.
Well,
I mean, you've got the whole of the moor so close to an urban situation. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
absolutely. Both sides of the river. Desert.
I just want to say that it was so amazing and uplifting to hear all this, and I don't know whether you are aware of how positive what you've presented is, particularly having in mind the doom and gloom that is otherwise surrounding us in all sorts of different ways. Now, I would suggest, maybe following on from what you've just said before the launch, about, of course, the website, the digital, whatever. What about putting something on the Look North part of the BBC News, because they often struggle with all sorts of ridiculous things that they put on, and I haven't heard about anything about this. Okay, my fault, maybe I didn't do my homework. But I would welcome this kind of news being much more approachable to people living in the Northeast. And believe me, one is proud of having something like this to talk about. So I think that we should really, well, I'm just listening, but it makes me feel good. And I think this should really be promoted and advanced and supported, and that would also recruit the grassroots.
Thank you. Yes, we'll be looking at press in the next week or so.
Please.
And Deza, thanks so much for the good vibes. It's really what a lovely way to enter the afternoon. I'm really sorry, but I'm being told by Bill, who is in control,
there's another booking on this room at 2 o'clock.
that we've got to call it a day.
This is the second time we've been thrown out.
Thank you, speakers.